Okay. Now we are connected. And okay, perfect. So we're going to go ahead and get this going. So, alright, welcome to the stream. My name is Penny. Hopefully folks will be showing up. What we're going to be looking at today is a game engine called Kaplay. So Kaplay can be found at kaplayjs.com, and it is the new version of Kaboom.js. Kaplay is open source and maintained by the community. It's in pretty rapid development right now, although right now it is also basically the same as Kaboom. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is we are going to build a space shooter, so sort of like Galaga. I guess I can go ahead and show you from the project that I already put together what it will look like. So let's take a look at that. Alright, I'm just going to open up a terminal, run our dev. Okay, so it looks like this. It's got sound effects, it's got music, you have enemies that are randomly picking their location and staying a fairly constant 5 or so. They fire their bullets randomly, and when you get hit, you have a game over screen, which allows you to start over. Nice and simple. Okay. So, that's what we're going to be building, and I'm going to go ahead and put this over here, because we are going to build this from scratch. I'm going to get as much of it done today as I can, and we'll pick up from there if I don't finish. Go ahead and turn down the music a bit. It sounds loud to me. There we go. Okay. So, if we go to guides, installation, it'll tell us that we can use npx create-kaplay mygame to create a Kaplay installation. So to do this, you need to have Node installed, and I will be using Visual Studio Code, so I recommend that as well. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to open up a terminal. If you have Mac, you can use your terminal. If you're in Windows, you can use your command or PowerShell. And we're going to go to Documents, Kaplay Projects, open this up, and we are going to type npx create-kaplay, and then a name. I'm going to call this Space Shooter Live. We hit enter and we wait. It's going to go ahead and get that all up and running. And then it says you could go into it and hit run npm run dev, which you absolutely could do. I'm actually going to do a little bit different since, oops, because we are going to be using code or Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to do that instead. And then close this terminal out. And now we have our code editor. First thing I'm going to do is make it a little bit bigger so it'll be easier for you to see. I'm going to open up a terminal, and I am going to do npm run dev. And that is going to allow us to run a dev server so we can see what's going on. This is our default before we do anything else. As you can see, it's created a Kaplay canvas and has a couple of default assets. And I'm going to go ahead and move that off screen, and we'll kind of check it out as we need. Okay, so now that we have that running, we can go ahead and start setting this up. Now, where did that npm run dev come from? Real fast, it's created here, and dev is just a script. This is the script that actually runs. npm is the node package manager, and so it's running this script. Just figured I'd show that just in case. So all of our sprites, all of our assets are going to go in the www folder, and all of our source code is going to go in the source directory. Okay. We have a simple HTML, very simple. It basically just has a title and not much else. And a link to our main.js. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up just a bit, although it doesn't really matter. Alright, and then I'm actually going to also do this. I'm going to copy this, I'm going to delete, and I'm going to put HTML5, which is just something that's built into Visual Studio Code because it gives us this additional information which is helpful for mobile devices. Okay. And then back in our body tag, we're going to go ahead and do this. Okay, so there's our index. Now we can get started in earnest. All right, next up, we're going to put all of our assets into our folder. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my Finder. And we are going to go to Documents, Kaplay Projects. And I do have these available in a GitHub repository. And I can actually just show you where that's at. Actually, I can put it in the chat. That would be an effective way to do it. So let's do that real fast. There we go. One moment, I'll get that for you. So this is where you can get all of the assets and follow along with the code if you'd like. And here we go. It's in the chat. Okay. I happen to have them locally though, so I'm just pulling them from my other folder. So I have a fonts, a music, an SFX, and a sprites. I'm going to go ahead and grab those and add those to my WW. We're going to merge and replace everything. Okay, so what do we have? We have Prestart 2P regular TTF. This is an open font license font by Google. For music, I have an OGG file that I created using 1BitDragon. Sound effects, I have 3 sound effects I made with JFXR. And sprites, I have the default sprite that comes with Kaplay and a sprite sheet that I made in Asprit. All of this again is available on the GitHub repository. Alright, so now we've got those imported. We're going to go over and we'll see that they are all here. And we're going to open up our main.js file and get this rolling. So this is generated code. So it imports start game from Kaplay. Start game is a bootstrapper essentially, and you can add configuration to this. So that's just an object with different options. You can look at those options by going to the documentation. I'll show that to you here. Oh my gosh. There we go. If you look at the documentation, you can see reference docs, start. You have all of these different options that you can choose from. Okay, so let's give this a go. So we're going to choose letterbox. We're going to set that to true at first anyway. Oh my gosh. We are going to do width of 1280, height of 720. We are going to do crisp, which crisp is for pixelated art, which is what this is, to true. We are going to do, let me check out my, did I do anything else? I'm not going to use a canvas. Oh, and yeah, I believe that's everything we need. Going back and looking at the documentation briefly. Yes, I believe that will do everything we need. Okay. So that is our basic setup. We're going to hit save, and let's see if I can set it up so that we can sort of see both things. It's not going to be perfect because to have it big enough for people to be able to read, it has to be fairly large, but we can at least try. Could be worse. All right, you do have to refresh manually. There you go. You can see our letterbox. You can see that our game window has set itself automatically, and it should do that on any device. Okay, next up, we're going to go ahead and set our background. Well, we're going to go ahead and do... So we have it set to K as the context, right? Which is great because it keeps our global namespace a little bit cleaner. And I'm going to go ahead and do what I just did, which is explicitly say global for the K is off. So we always have to put the K dot. It does add a little bit more typing, but I think the more explicit is easier to read and makes more sense if somebody was to follow after, even if it's you following after. So we're going to set background. which does exactly what you think. We're going to use the color feature, and actually it's going to be the capital C dot from hex. Right, and then you can see our IntelliSense is telling us what it does or what we need, and what we need is a string that is a hex value. And I got this from my Aspirate file. Hit OK. There we go. So now we have our nice black background that kind of hides everything while maintaining the letterbox in the background. Okay. Next up, we are going to go ahead and create some files. So in our source directory, we're in a new file. We're going to have loadassets.js, which is going to be for loading assets. We're going to have a couple of scenes. So we're going to have makeMenu.js, and we're going to have makeGameOver.js, and we're going to have makeGame.js. Okay, so those are all now existing. Starting out with, we're going to start with our main menu, I think. So our main menu is going to be a function, so export function, which we're going to call makeMenu. It's going to take our context in, and we are going to return k.scene. So k.scene is a Kaplay function that creates a scene, which is kind of like a level. You have to give it a name, which again, you can see it in the IntelliSense here. We're going to call it menu, and then you have to give it a function that it runs. So it wants an arrow function. There we go. And everything that you're going to do, you're going to put in here. So Kaplay runs on this idea of components, which you add, and you create game objects by having an add and series of components to create one game object. You can name this or not, it's up to you. So we are going to start adding in some components. So first of all, we know we're going to want some controls, right? So we're going to say k.add. It takes an array, and in that array we're going to add k.text, which is a component. And it starts by having the text you want it to say. So space to fire, arrow keys to move around. Okay. And then it takes an object which has a few features that we want, or you can basically add configuration. We want it to be size 16, and we want it to be font, which we're going to use a font called Press 2P. Now we're going to have to define that for it to work, but we can get it set up now. Okay, in addition to our text, we are going to want k.anchor, which sets the origin. I think it used to actually be origin and when it was Kaboom, and I think origin was probably a better name, but this is what they're calling it now. And it takes a string. We're going to want it to be the center. Makes it easier to place text around. Then k.color, lowercase c, notice, and then we do k.color, capital C, dot from hex. You don't have to do it with the hex. You can do RGB. I just happen to like hex because I happen to know the colors for my Game Boy aesthetic that I'm going for here. And that's going to be E0 F8 CF. There we go. And then another component that we want is our position, k.pos position. And we're going to do k.center .x and k.center .y plus 128. All right, and that is our complete object. So this is our text object that gives this text, sets a size, sets a font, places our anchor in the center, gives it a color and a position on the screen. One thing added, one thing done. Next one. So this is a new game object. This one we're going to give a name to, and you'll see why in a minute. It's going to be our start button. And just like before, k.add, because we are creating a component. And we are going to do k.rect, which creates a rectangle. We want that rectangle to be 32 times 6 in size. by 16 times 4. So this is just the size of the rectangle. And then 0, 0 for our width and height. I'm not really sure why there's 0, 0, but I did some experimentation earlier, and that's just what worked. Once again, we're going to have a position, and that position is going to be k.center dot x, k.center dot y. Then this is going to have a color, which is starting to feel familiar, I'm sure. K.C color dot from x. And then our hex code 306850. Okay. So hopefully this is starting to make sense already. You just build your game object using these components and then place it where you want it, and then add functionality with code, which we're going to do in a little while. K.area is a new component. This component gives it a an area that can detect collisions, basically. And we need that because this is going to be clicked on. And then lastly, we're going to have a string called start button. This is used for creating groups. They're called tags in this system. And so you could have it say anything with the tag start button, do this to it in code. It's very, very useful. Okay. There we go. Our all set there. So then our next one is going to take advantage of the fact that we named start button. So it's going to be start button dot add. So this creates a child of start button, which means any of the positions, etc., are going to be relative to the parent. So that makes it really easy to create like text on a button, which is exactly what we're going to do. So we say start. We're going to have our objects that tells it the size, which is going to be 32, the font, which is going to be the same press to play. Okay. So that's it for that. And we're going to set our anchor to center. You get to learn these commands really fast because you can repeat them so many times. Okay, from hex once again. And this one is 071821. Okay. I think that is it for that one. Yes, it is. Alright, so we're done with creating objects for this bit anyway, and we're going to have it now do something, which is great. So we're going to have a couple of things. So the event listeners all follow the same pattern, which is on name of the event listener. So we're going to do K on hover. Well, what are we looking to hover over? So you have to pick an object, and we want to use our tags. So anything with the start button tag. Then we are going to say run this function. And again, it's looking for an arrow function. And so we are going to do start button dot color equals k dot color. Oops, dot color dot from hex. And this will give us the effect of when the mouse hovers over it, it'll look like it's changed, right? This is going to be our E0 F8CF. Okay. Alright, so that looks good. So now we have our hover ability. Next up, we're going to create what happens when hover ends. So we're going to actually copy and paste this one down because it's almost the same. On hover end, very intuitive, which is nice. And then just back to the color we started with, which is the 306850. Okay. Next up, we're going to have an on-click listener. So k.onClick, again, very, very intuitive. Everything has the same basic setup for how it's written out for internal functions. We're doing our click on the start button, and we want it to run a function, which is an arrow function. And what do we want that to do? We want it to do k.go, which is to go to a scene, and go to the game scene. Okay? check my thing, make sure, and that is our main menu. So I'm going to go to the top and I'll scroll slowly so you can take a minute later on if you want to pause and follow this. Okay. There you go. That's our make menu. So, bada bing. We'll go here. Next up, we're going to do our load assets so that we can go ahead and show you something on the screen. So it's going to be more interesting if we can see something. For this one, I am going to copy and paste, and then I'll just explain because it's really simple. So we have an export function, load assets, which takes the context of K for Kaplay's context. K.loadSpriteAtlas loads a sprite sheet. We have to give it a location, which in our case is in, so www is considered the root. So it's in sprites, sprites.png. Then we have a series of names. So for each sprite, which I can actually show you the sprite, that might be helpful. Well, maybe. Steam's updating. I'll show it to you in a second. So each of these is going to be a individual tile in our sprite sheet. So I'm calling one ship, and it has an x and y of 0, that's its location, a width and height of 16, a slice x of 0, and a slice of y of 0, meaning that it only has one frame. If you change that to, say, slice x3, there would be 3 horizontal frames. Make sense? Okay, great. This is opened up so I can just show you. Open recent sprites. So if you take a look here, so this one is 0, so it's at 0, 0, and it's 16 by 16. This one is at 16, 0, and it's 16 by 16, etc. So if you look here, we have, there we go. So our ship is ship at 0, 0, 16 by 16. Our background is at 16 over, 16 down, and it's 16 by 16 wide. Our laser is at 32 over, 0 down. Our enemy is at 16 over, 0 down. And our bullet is at 0 down, or 0 over, 16 down. And that's all there is to it. Like I said, if you had animations, you would set the number of animation frames using the slice, and then you would have a parameter called anims. But we don't have that for our very simple game. All right, next up, we're going to load our font. So k.loadFont. Press2p, which is the thing we named the font in the last file in the make menu file. This just acts as a handle, so we can call on it, and then we have to say its location, which in our case is fonts press2play-regular.ttf. Okay. Next up, we're going to load our sounds, which again is the exact same process. This is all very intuitive, very much the same thing each time. So we have laser, which we're going to call laser from laser.wave, bullet, which comes from bullet.wave, and explode, which comes from explode.wave. And then it says in the documentation that there is a load music function that you use for longer files, but when I tried it, it said it wasn't a function, so maybe there's a bug right now. But so I just loaded it as a sound, called it background bg, musicgroove.1. So there you go. Very, very simple. So now everything is loaded, and obviously you're going to have this load assets folder run for any of that to actually happen. So we're going to go to our main.js. And the first thing we're going to do, now that we have kind of shown how all this works, we're going to delete this base code. We're going to set our background. Then we're going to load our assets. To do that, we're going to do load assets. It's going to import up here, import the load assets from load assets. We're going to put there, and we're giving it our context of K. And now our assets will load into the game. Because our assets are loaded into the game, we can say make menu, because that will now work. It also needs the context of K, and then it imports make menu from make menu. And then we can initialize our game by telling it where to go up front. So k.go, and we want it to go to the menu scene. So let's go ahead and test it. That should be everything we need. We go over here, we hit reload, and here is our menu scene. You can see our start button reacts as it should with the hover and unhover. Space to fire, arrow keys to move around. I can just make it bigger for a moment to show you. Very nice, right? Easy peasy. We've done what? 19... let's see, 30, so 40, roughly 80 lines of code total. And we already have all of our assets. We already have a main menu. Very nice. Let's keep going, shall we? So we're going to do our game over scene next. So we're going to go to make game over and go over here to my and go ahead and copy this over. All right, so once again, we're exporting a function, make game over, which takes the context of k. It once again returns a scene named game over, which then runs this function. And we add, just like before, we're making components first. So text, game over, size 32, font, press 2p, position, center x, center y, color from hex, and it's the whitish color. Anchor center so that the text goes out from its center in both directions. Then we're going to add another text, press enter to play again, size 32, press 2p, center x, center y plus 64 pixels. Then color, this is the same whitish color, anchor center for the same reason. Then we have our on-key press, so that this is an event listener. On-key press means one press. On-key down would be like holding down to move. What key? The inner key. This takes a string. It can be space, left, individual letters, however you want to do it. Then we are going to run a function. And we're going to add k.add k.go game. Why is there an add there? That's not necessary. I'm almost positive. So we're going to actually get rid of that. And we're going to see if it still runs, because I think it will. I'm not sure what that's about. Okay, so k.go game. This looks exactly like our k.go game here. And either way, it gets you to the game, which is the main part of our code. So that's that. You can pause it here if you'd like. Take a look at this code. Hopefully it makes sense at this point. We're just adding components to objects, then adding objects to the screen. Lastly, we're going to do make game. So this will be the largest part of our game. So when we think about what Galaga is, right, we have a player ship that can move around and fire bullets up. We have enemies that come down and they can fire bullets down. And when the player hits a ship or an enemy bullet, it blows up. When the enemy hits a player bullet, it blows up. That's basically Galaga, right? You can certainly make it more complex, but for showing how this engine works, that's more than sufficient. So this is going to start out just like the other two screens with an export function, which we're going to call make game, which takes the k context. Hopefully this is all feeling very normal by now. It returns k.scene, which we are going to call game, and it runs an arrow function, which everything's going to go inside of. Okay, that looks good. Then we're gonna create our game objects, just like we've been doing. So I will copy all those over and we'll look at them. I'll see if there's anything that's new. Okay. So our background is an object, so it's k.add position a sprite. So this one is new. So k.sprite adds a sprite to the screen. We're naming our sprite background. We're giving it a width and height of 720, and we're setting its tile to true. So instead of stretching, it'll tile out. We're also setting its scale to 4. These are 16 by 16, so by scaling to 4, it's going to make each tile 64 by 64. Next up, we have our HUD box, which is heads-up display box. It's just a background for our score. We're going to add, it's going to have a position at 0, 0, a rect, which creates a rectangle, 1280 by 64. It's the same way we made our button. Then we're going to do an outline of 4, which is going to give it a small outline, 4 pixels wide. Then we're going to do color from hex. This is going to be our dark green, I believe. And then Z is new. So this is Z, short for Z order. The higher the number, the more on top of other objects it is. So if like -5 would be all the way in the back, 10 would be very, very forward. Most things are going to be somewhere between like 1 and 4, depending on how you make your game. They come up sequentially, automatically as they're created. But this assures our HUD box will be on top. Next, our score, which again has a position, a color, a text, which we've seen all of this, size 32, press 2P. We set the Z order to 10. Since it's the same Z order and it's underneath HUD box, it'll be on top of HUD box, and they'll both be on top of everything else. And then this is also new. You can create an object and set basically whatever you want in terms of key value pairs. So we have a score with a value of 0. And we're going to increment that value as the score goes up. Then we have our player, which has a position, a sprite, which you saw, and that's ship. We have an area, a body, which we went over area. Body is new. Body creates a physics body so that it can be, it can interact with the world. Strictly speaking, I don't think it's required because we aren't using gravity and we aren't pushing on objects. So we could actually probably remove that. We're going to see. Well, I think what I'm going to do is comment it out because I'm fairly certain we don't need it. All right, then we have an anchor, center, which we talked about, scale, which we talked about. Here's another object, which we've created a speed variable, 800. Oh, that's why we need body, because there's a function called move, which body provides. And we're going to use move to move our player. Then the tag, right? So if it's just a string, it's a tag. So the tag is player. Next up, we are going to create a custom function, which is called makeEnemy. We'll take a look at that. And make sure we're... Okay, so makeEnemy is just a custom function. I named that whatever I wanted. You could name it something different. It's going to return a game object, which we create by adding with a position. K.rand is new. Rand is a random number generator. If you only put one number in it, it'll be between 0 and that number. If you put more than one number in it for each one, it will be between the two numbers, right? So a range. A vec2, k.vec2 is a component that allows you to put two values within parentheses, so basically like an xy coordinate. So this says do a random between x of 0 and the width of the screen and y 0 and 0. So it'll go between, it'll basically generate anywhere on the x and always put them at the 0 y. We want the sprite to be enemy. They have to have an area. They have to have an anchor. They have to have a scale. They need a speed. And then they need a fire timer because they're going to fire bullets at random. And that timer is going to go up to create that. And then the fire time, k.rand, so there's our rand again, between 10 frames and 100 frames. So we want it to do anywhere from 10 to 100 frames before it fires a bullet and resets to 0. And then we have our tag enemy. To initialize things, you could do this probably a little bit less sloppy, but there's nothing wrong with this way, and that's what we're going to do today. And that is, we're going to tell it to make 5 enemies. So it's going to run this 5 times. Each one will have a different location and a different fire time, which will create some lovely randomness for our game. Next up is controls. This is a big section, but it's not a difficult section. It's just kind of repeating the same ideas over and over again, so we're going to take a look at it. Okay, so for controls, so on key down, so notice that on, that's always going to be an event listener. Down means that you can hold it down. If you hold down the left, we're going to run this function. Player.move, go minus player speed. If we go up to our player, just as a reminder, our player has a speed of 800, so that'll be minus 800. If the player's position X is less than or equal to 32, which is half of the sprite's width, then it's going to stop moving. That keeps it on the screen. On key right, same exact thing. Hold down right, you'll go to the right at the player speed, 800 pixels per second. And you will not move on the Y. And if player position.x is greater than 1280 minus 32, again, half that width, it's going to keep you from going in there. It's going to keep you from going off screen, right? Makes sense. Next up, on key down, up. So now we're going to be working in the Y direction, player.move, 0 in the X, minus player.speed. So to go up, you go in the negative direction. If it's less than or equal to 0, go ahead and stop the player from going past that. And then player position.y equals 0. Same, down. Now we're going in the downward direction by going positive speed in player.move on the Y. If it's greater than 720 minus 32, then it's going to be 720 minus 32, which will keep you from going off the screen. Now we're back to key press. So on key press means it'll fire once. If you hit the space key, it's going to run this function. It's going to play a sound. So it's going to k.play laser at 30% volume. In our load assets, we created the laser sound by doing k.load sound laser. Now we're using it. Make sense? Okay. Then we're going to add a game object with a position, a sprite, an area, an anchor set to center, and k.offscreen is new. It's what happens when a object goes off screen. And in this case, all we're saying is destroy it. So that's going to free up memory. Once again, we're scaling everything by 4. We give the laser a speed of 1000, so it's faster than the player's ship. And we give it a tag of laser. All right, next up, we're going to look at our game loop. So this is going to be our updates. Okay. So updates work, they are event listeners at the end of the day, and they happen roughly 60 times per second. So on update, where anything tagged laser, we want it to do laser.move 0 minus laser speed. So it's gonna, the minute the laser exists, it's gonna start moving up, and it's gonna do that until it hits the end of the screen, at which point it will destroy itself. On update bullet is exactly the same thing. It's just gonna move down until it goes off the screen and destroys itself. The enemies are going to move at their speed down, and every frame the fire timer is going to go up. So remembering that the enemy fire timer starts at 0, and it's looking for a certain number which is randomly generated between 10 and 100. When it hits that, going back down here, so if the enemy position is greater than 784, we're going to destroy that enemy, and then we're going to make a new one using our make enemy function. If the enemy fire timer is greater than or equal to the fire time, then randomly generated, we're going to play the bullet sound at 30%. Then we're going to add our bullet, which will then immediately start going down because of its update feature. We're going to create it at the enemy's position X and the enemy's position Y plus 32. It's going to have a sprite, an area, an anchor, an off-screen set to destroy, and a scale of 4, and a speed of 500. So the bullets from the aliens are slower than the lasers from the player. Has a tag of bullet, and enemy.firetimer gets reset to 0, so it can restart the process of firing a bullet later. And because every time that it reaches the end of the screen, it's destroyed doing it a new enemy, that number that the fire timer has to reach is going to change consistently. So it's going to create some wonderful randomness. Hopefully that's all making sense. Let me see, check and see. Hey, hello there. I'm just checking the chat. Yeah, this is all JS. It's not specifically for RPG Maker, but it is all JavaScript. It's for an engine called Kaplay, and it actually does a fantastic job of teaching JavaScript. So hopefully this is helpful. And these ideas apply to any given JavaScript-based game engine. All right. Okay. Let's see. And get back to it here. Go. So we're going to go ahead and bring in our collision, which is our last section. And our collision is just going to finish up our process here. Here we go. I always have to try and make sure I don't put it in the wrong place. Okay. So, collision, they're event listeners. Just like every other event listener, it starts with on. Which two tags are we looking for? The laser and the enemy. So anything tagged with laser and enemy. We're going to play explode at 60% volume. We're going to add to our score. We're going to reset our score text that's visible on the screen. We're going to destroy the enemy, destroy the laser, and we're going to make a new enemy. If the player and the enemy collide, it's going to destroy the enemy and the player, play the explode, stop the music, and go to the game over screen. If the player and the bullet collide, it's going to destroy the player and the bullet, play the explode, stop the music, and go to the game over scene. So that's it. That's the entirety of our collision and game loop in just, what, 109 to 160, so 60 lines of code. That controls the entirety of our actual game loop. Pretty cool, huh? So we have our load assets. We have our make game. We have our make game over. We have our make menu. We go back to our main, and we can just tie it all together. So we have our load assets and our make menu. We also need to make game, and it will require the same K. And we need to make our game over, which will need our K. We're going to go ahead and make sure that it did make game over from the correct files. Starts at menu, and now if we did everything right, which I think we did, load our game. Oops, music is not defined. So let's go ahead and see where that error is. So to look at errors, in case you don't know, in JavaScript, you can hit F12 to go to the console. This is saying in make game 166. Let's go take a look. Make game. Ah, I know why. So at 166, we told it to stop playing the music, but the music doesn't exist because we didn't tell it to go anywhere. So right at the top, we're going to create our music. And I'll just go up to the top and make sure. There we go. So to do that, we're going to create a constant named music. We're going to set it to k.play, which is to play a file. What do we want it to play? We want it to play our background music, which is called BG. And we want it to do that with a configuration object. We're going to set it to volume, there we go, 0.8, so 80%. And this one, we're going to set loop to true. Now let's see if it runs. And I'll kill the Spotify music. There we go. And there you go. Our score goes up, our sound plays, the enemies constantly regenerate and move around, fire at different speeds, and when we die, game over, press enter to play again, we press enter, it starts over. And there you have it, a Kaplay game written entirely in JavaScript in about 40 minutes. Now, I will say when I made this from scratch, I had to go through and look at the documentation, right, to understand how everything was working. And I had to look up the names of functions, which is an important part of coding, right? A big part of learning any programming language in any system or game engine is to go through the docs. The docs here are pretty easy. So you go to kaplay.js.com/reference, and you are going to want to use your Control F. Say we wanted to look up sprite. We could go and see if we can find it, like our sprite components. The sprite component is right here. We can look at how it works. It has an example, and you can do whatever it is, music, right? You'll get all the references to music, and you can start to kind of look and see and understand how it all works. That took about 2.5 hours total. So this entire thing took about 2.5 hours to make. I am going to be posting the, well, I do have the code up in GitHub. There is in the chat a link, and I will go ahead and put that in the description as well. I'm also going to put a playable version up in itch.io. Actually, that's the last thing we can do. So let me go ahead and pull up our terminal again. Now we've been running the dev server, so we're going to go ahead and hit Control-C to cancel that. And we are going to do npm run bundle. Now this is also defined in our package.json, and bundle creates a zip file with the completed game that we can then use for itch.io. And it should have put that in dist game.zip. Okay, so now that we have that, we can actually just go ahead and go over there, and you can kind of get an idea. So you would do something like go to itch, go to your dashboard, and create a new project. Recommends game jams. Where is the new? create a new project down at the bottom. There we go. We're going to call this Kaplay Space Shooter Live. And a simple Galaga-like example for coding Kaplay games with JS. It is a game. It is going to run in the browser. We are going to say that it, folks want to donate $2 they can, but it's free. We're going to upload files. We're going to go to where it is stored. We're going to have it run this file we played in the browser. And we know that the size is 1280 by 720 because we made it ourselves. It is not mobile friendly. We will have a full screen button. That's fine. And we're just going to make sure it's working before we write any kind of description. I can do that off camera. Here is our game. We can take it full screen, hit start, and there it is. Loaded and working on itch.io in, 2 minutes? Ready to be played by the world. So hopefully you can take this knowledge, make a cool game of your own. I'd love for you to link it in the comments if you'd like. Or just add to this one, however you'd like to do. I made all of these assets, including the music and sound effects myself, and you are welcome to use them. I will mark them as, this whole project is MIT license, including the assets. So hopefully this was helpful, and I would appreciate a like and subscribe if it was. Please let me know what kind of content you'd like to see. I know that there has been an ask for more JavaScript lately, so this is a complete JavaScript project in 45 minutes. Thank you so much and have a great rest of the evening.